Biden wants to implement more gun control. He says it's no big deal, because nobody has the firepower to beat the US government anyway. Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chaffel. Hey, it's summer at last. And with many coronavirus restrictions lifted, you know what that means. It's time to go outside, enjoy some sun, fun, and a surge in gun violence. Gun violence has been up since the coronavirus pandemic began last year. And President Joe Biden has made no secret he wants more gun control. But last week, he laid out some of his specific plans. And it has Second Amendment advocates freaking out. The Second Amendment says the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Historically, it's been very rare for governments to allow their people to have arms. No, Seamus, you know what I meant. Thank you. But the U.S. was founded on the idea governments get their powers from the consent of the governed. That's in the Declaration of Independence. In other words, the people let the governments have its powers, not the other way around. And so, as the Second Amendment says, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. But President Biden says not so fast. Guns really wouldn't help the American people against a U.S. government that turned tyrannical, because the government has fighter planes and nukes.
But if you want to think you need to have weapons to take on the government, you need F-15s and maybe some nuclear weapons.
U.S. soldiers who have fought in the Middle East might disagree. Now, Biden said something like this back during the 2020 presidential race, too.
Those who say the tree of liberty is watered with the blood of patriots, a great line. Well, guess what? The fact is, if you're going to take on the government, you need an F-15 with Hellfire missiles. There's no way an AK-47 is going to take care of you if you're going to take on, you're worried about the government coming down, knocking down your door.
So, there are a lot of problems with that. First of all, the blood of the patriots line is taken from Thomas Jefferson. He was talking about the centuries-long fight for liberty against tyranny, which Biden botched by omitting the part mentioning the blood of tyrants. That's kind of an important part of it. Another problem is Biden's main premise. You can't fight an authoritarian U.S. government because it's already too powerful. That's kind of a disturbing message coming from the President of the United States. It also contradicts things he's said previously. He's called for a ban on assault weapons because there's no reason someone needs a weapon of war. Except, didn't Biden just say people would need weapons of war to resist the government? Of course, that might not be true according to Biden's own narrative. Because how can he say people need F-15s and nukes to fight the U.S. government, while also saying protesters without any guns nearly took over the U.S. Capitol building in a dangerous insurrection? But here's Biden's main point. To stop the surge in gun violence, there needs to be gun control.
The point is that there's always been the ability to rationally limit the type of weapon that can be owned and who can own it.
Biden said the Second Amendment, from the day it was passed, limited the type of people who could own a gun and what type of weapon you could own. You couldn't buy a cannon. Well, technically that's not true, since this is the entire text of the Second Amendment, and it does not actually impose any limits, including on cannons. But we don't have a problem with mass cannoning. So specifically, what is Biden's plan for dealing with the surge in gun violence? And would it work? More after the break. Welcome back. Unless you didn't see an ad because YouTube demonetized us. But you don't need F-15s or nukes to stand up to YouTube censorship. All it takes is as little as $1 per episode on the crowdfunding website Patreon. Thanks to your support, we don't have to rely on YouTube ad dollars to keep the show running. Visit patreon.com/America Uncovered to find out how you can help. So to stop gun violence, President Biden is proposing a 5-point plan. 1. Give more money and resources to police. Fund the police. What so many Biden voters wanted. That money would come from the COVID-19 stimulus bill, which was passed back in March. The second part of the plan is to invest in summer programs, support services, and employment opportunities for young people. This includes things like hiring more social workers and funding programs to help at-risk youth get jobs. Part 3 is investing in community violence intervention programs. There is evidence that these programs can be very effective if they're carried out the right way and with the right resources. If you'd like to know more about that, check out our recent episode, Can We Stop Gun Violence Without Gun Control? Part 4 is helping ex-felons re-enter society. That includes helping ex-felons find jobs and housing. But the biggest focus of President Biden's recent speech is gun control. What he says is stopping the flow of guns used to commit violence. Biden wants to crack down on unregistered ghost guns, which are guns the owner assembles themselves. But he especially wants to go after rogue gun dealers. He calls them merchants of death who illegally sell guns. You see, cities with the toughest gun laws also tend to have the highest rates of gun violence. The reasons for that are multifaceted and complex. Or not, according to Biden. He says the reason is because gun dealers are smuggling in guns from neighboring cities and states. That's why he's calling for a zero-tolerance policy for gun dealers who willfully give guns to people who aren't allowed to own any. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, the ATF, will seek to punish gun dealers who don't have permits. But come on, what about the illegal cannon traffickers? U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland says the ATF will revoke licenses from legal gun dealers the first time they violate federal law.
ATF will initiate proceedings to revoke the licenses of dealers that willfully violate the law by failing to conduct required background checks, falsifying records, failing to respond to trace requests, refusing to permit ATF to conduct inspections, or transferring firearms to persons who are prohibited from owning them.
Over the next month, the Justice Department will launch 5 new strike forces to crack down on gun trafficking. And again, the focus is on connecting places where firearms originate and where they are used to commit crimes, which might be in different states. And Biden says there will be consequences.
If you willfully sell a gun to someone who's prohibited from possessing it, if you willfully fail to run a background check, if you willfully falsify a record, if you willfully fail to cooperate with the tracing requests or inspections, my message to you is this: we'll find you, and we will seek your license to sell guns. We'll make sure you can't sell death and mayhem on our streets. It's an outrage. It has to end, and we'll end it, period.
But the real question is, will cracking down on rogue gun dealers actually help stop the surge of gun violence? Turns out, it's pretty unlikely. More after the break. Welcome back after that commercial break. Or not. So, will the crackdown on rogue gun dealers stop the surge in gun violence? Well, according to a 2018 Northwestern University study on Chicago gang members, very few gang members buy their guns new from a dealer. Only 2% were purchased directly from a licensed gun dealer in a documented sale. And at most, 5% of guns found in the hands of gang members were sold out the back door by dirty dealers. That is, licensed gun dealers who look the other way during the sale. In other words, well over 90% of guns used in gang violence are obtained completely outside the system. So how is going after licensed gun dealers going to solve the problem? Well, it won't. According to former acting director of the ATF, Michael Sullivan, claiming rogue licensed dealers are the problem may appease some in the anti-gun community, but it is simply not true and not supported by any facts. He cites a 2019 report from the Bureau of Justice Statistics on inmates caught with guns in 2016. That report says that only 7% of criminals who use guns had bought them under their own name from a licensed firearm dealer. Other experts agree that rogue dealers aren't the problem. They say the problem is what's called straw purchases. That's where someone buys a gun for someone else. Like if Shelley wanted a cannon, but asked me to buy it for her instead of buying it directly herself. That's not a problem for most things, but straw buying guns is illegal. That's because if someone is asking you to buy a gun on their behalf, it's probably illegal for them to buy one. For example, they might not pass a background check, but you would. ATF has said that nearly half of illegally trafficked firearms originate with straw purchasers, all of whom pass background checks. But in Biden's current plan, there's no mention of zero tolerance against straw buys. So it sounds like Biden's plan to limit who can own guns and what types won't actually solve the gun violence problem. But when Biden says this,
but if you want to think you need to have weapons to take on the government, you need F-15s and maybe some nuclear weapons.
that's going to lead to a surge in people buying guns and ammo. Because the fear of a tyrannical government is exactly why people are allowed to own guns. And letting the people preserve the spirit of resistance is literally our founding fathers' explanation for why people should own guns. I wouldn't be surprised if the National Rifle Association gave Biden a #1 salesperson award. And as for this point Biden made,
the point is that there's always been the ability to rationally limit the type of weapon that can be owned and who can own it.
Some people will say that of course that makes sense. This is what a gun looked like back in the Founding Fathers' day. This is what they look like now. If they had known that, they would have limited people's rights to bear arms. That's like saying the Founding Fathers couldn't have imagined the reach of television or the internet, so we should have limits on freedom of speech. There are people who say that. And if you think, well, that's different because you can't kill anyone with freedom of speech, you don't appreciate how truly revolutionary freedom of speech is. You've heard the pen is mightier than the sword, right? Ideas can overturn kings and empires. So maybe we should be careful when the government that's supposed to be of the people talks about taking away the people's rights, even if the people don't have nukes or cannons. What do you think about Biden's remarks? Leave your comments below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.